So I'll tell you a little bit about the Rewilding community of practice. So we are operating under the umbrella of the Global Landscapes Forum, a big NGO, and we aim to connect practitioners, landowners, scientists, and rewilding enthusiasts from a range of different backgrounds. So for you to know, we have members living in all kinds of continents, from India to Africa, Europe. We have members in the US as well. And some of us are quite, I would say, seasoned rewilders with a lot of in the field experience, but others just have a really big interest for rewilding. So we are very open to different people from different backgrounds joining us. So we seek to support and inspire a community of global change makers by providing a platform for knowledge exchange, discussions, and the organization of events such as this one to mobilize the regenerative potential of rewilding. First of all, we have three wonderful speakers, Lena Hommes, Steiner, and Hanna Ollos and Jonas Sommer. The first presentation today will be by Lena Hommes. Lena is an expert on everything to do with dams and waterways. She comes from a more academic kind of point of view as a researcher from Wageningen University. She'll be able to tell you a lot more about that in a moment. We will have a Q&A session with Lena immediately after her presentation because she will have to leave quite quickly. So following that Q&A, we'll have Steiner, who is a permaculture expert and an expert on all things water use in a sustainable way. And then we'll break this up with a little bit of a Zoom poll to make sure you don't all fall asleep, and followed by a presentation by Hanna Ollos and Jonas Sommer. They are the co-founders of Biking for Biodiversity and have biked around 20 countries globally, which is incredible. I'm very, very jealous. And in a quest to essentially highlight challenges and solutions to biodiversity decline. And obviously, during their journey, have been encountering lots and lots of waterways. Finally, we'll have a moderated discussion and Q&A for the remaining speakers, and we'll wrap up. Fantastic. So I've already told you a little bit about today's speakers. Please, please, please follow them on social media. They have very, very engaging channels, great content from anything practical to inspiring bits and bobs. So yeah, that's it for today. Lena, are you ready to present?
Well, hi everybody. It's great to see so many people being interested in rewilding. And especially in river restoration. So my name is Lena Hommes. I did my PhD and also part of my postdoc at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. Well, today I'm going to talk about especially discussions and conflicts around dam removal in Europe. When I started my PhD, I was specifically interested in conflicts around infrastructure construction. So I was looking at all the conflicts triggered by, for example, the construction of dams, hydropower plants, water transfers, and so on. But in the later part of my PhD, I heard for the first time about the increasing trend of dam removal, which is happening in different countries around the world, mainly the US and Europe, but also others. And I was really triggered by it because I kind of grew up in my academic life by only looking at infrastructure construction. And for me, yeah, you construct a dam, but you don't remove it in my thinking back then. So I was really, intrigued by hearing about dam removal. And I was even more intrigued about hearing that dam removal is happening more and more, but it actually also triggers quite a lot of conflict in different countries and different sites. So I wanted to know a bit more about this because for me at that time it was obvious why you would be not always in favor of dam construction, but I thought, dam removal, what's people's reasons to contest dam removal? So I'm going to talk a bit about that today. Just as a very general introduction to dam removal, here you see a map which you can find on the website of Dam Removal Europe. of the registered dam removals in Europe in the last years, and they state that around 5,000 dams have been removed. I have to make a little side note here, because oftentimes, we talk about dam removal, but actually, if you look very specifically, it's not always dams, but it's also smaller structures such as weirs. Actually, a lot of these points you see here in the map of removals that have happened to restore river connectivity are actually smaller barriers. So in that sense, keep that in mind. If I say dam removal, it's not always about massive dams, but oftentimes also about any other kind of transversal structures that impound a river and that change river's natural hydromorphology. So it's all kinds of barriers in rivers. Why is dam removal an upcoming topic, and why is it promoted more and more? There are different reasons for it. Just going to go quickly over them so you have a little bit of context. One is that dams and other structures in rivers are becoming, with the years, naturally older and older. Materials are decaying, and that leads, in some cases, to structural obsolescence and also safety concerns. That's one possible reason. Another one is that with time, they might become inoperable or not profitable anymore because of increasing maintenance costs or because of reduced capacity in terms of, for example, dams for hydropower production. There are also obviously ecological reasons to want to remove dams and other river barriers. And that is specifically to increase river or to restore river connectivity, to restore sediment flows, to help biodiversity to recover, to enable fish migration, and other ecological benefits. Dam removal is also increasingly promoted because it responds to recent policies. Where the EU Water Framework Directive is not so recent, but anyway, it's still a very important framework when we talk about rivers in Europe. And dam removal is oftentimes promoted as a very cost-efficient measure to improve rivers' ecological status, which is one of the objectives set out in the Water Framework Directive. And probably many of you have also heard about the European Union Biodiversity Strategy and the more recent even Nature Restoration Law, which actually aims to restore 25,000 kilometers of rivers in Europe by 2030. So there are policy reasons or political reasons to be removing dams, ecological reasons, economic reasons, and also, let's say, material reasons. So you might think, but that sounds really great, great thing to remove dams and restore rivers. But actually, I think, well, if you look at how it's implemented in practice and what the experiences, not of all dam removals, obviously, but of some dam removals, what they show is that it's not that easy, and actually in some cases met with fierce resistance from local communities and local stakeholders. So to understand these kind of contestations a bit better in my research, I made the choice to look at Spain specifically. Spain, because it has a very interesting and famous history of hydraulic engineering, meaning that a lot of dams have been constructed, a lot of massive irrigation systems, water transfers, and so on. So rivers have been really heavily modified in the last decades. And at the same time, Spain has been mentioned in the dam removal community in Europe as one of the front runners when it comes to dam removal in Europe. So there were headlines in international newspapers last year or early this year, I think, saying Spain leading dam removals in Europe. So given these two dynamics, I thought, it's very interesting to see what's happening in Spain. And I was specifically looking into one case study, which I think, as always with case studies, it's very context specific, but at the same time, I think the case study I'm going to talk about just in a bit also raises very important dilemmas or questions that are relevant for all kinds of restoration and rewilding projects. So yeah, again, briefly, the case I looked at was the Los Torranes Dam, which is in the province of Teruel, about 1.5 hours driving from Valencia. It's a dam that was constructed in the 1950s for hydropower production. It's 14 meters high, so it's not that small, but also not massive, let's say. But in 2018, so I think after 75 years more or less of having been used for hydropower production, the license for its use expired. And the energy company that was in charge of the dam decided to not renew the license because they would have had to invest a lot of money in order to be able to renew the license. So they said, no, thank you, we are not interested because it's also not economically viable for us anymore. And that's when the ministry, the responsible ministry, decided to approve the demolition. And then a lot of conflict and local mobilization took off. So here, yeah, you see a couple of manifestations close to the dam saying, leave the Los Torranes Dam alone. Without water, there's no life. Yeah, and here also, it looks like small manifestations, but actually this case attracted a lot of attention, political and media attention, until the national level. So it really became a massive discussion. Should this dam be removed? Should the river be restored or not? Then the question, why was it so contested? One was that the dam had been used, it was originally constructed for hydropower, but it was also used throughout the years to irrigate local orchards of a neighborhood. And I think this importantly shows, because oftentimes in river restoration we say, okay, let's remove old obsolete barriers. But oftentimes they are obsolete on paper, but in practice they have become embedded in local identity and local everyday practices that were unforeseen in the original design, but that have nevertheless been become very important. So this dam on paper, it was not being used anymore or not usable anymore, but in practice it was used for irrigation. But those proponents of river restoration said, but the water intake, it has never been officially acknowledged. It's illegal. Yeah, so there you have the question, okay, which kind of uses should be taken into account? Those only on paper, also those in practice. Yeah, this was one of the big dilemmas. Another dilemma was also, which I think touches upon very profound societal questions about what is nature and what kind of nature do we want? Is nature only a free-flowing river, or what is nature and what kind of rivers do we want? I see your messages, Jonas, by the way, about the time. So, for example, the local irrigation community, they said those proposing the dam removal, refer to the environment from a mechanistic approach from their offices, missing a holistic and integral vision that also considers people. The dam is damaging, or the removal of the dam is damaging this natural, territorial, and social ecosystem in which we live. And another one saying, where is the legislation that establishes the prevalence of certain environmental values over cultural ones? So also, does ecology count more, or does the social traditional use of the water count more? Whereas those proponing the dam removal said, no, the dam damages the connectivity of the river ecosystems, and that is the most important point to take into account. And then the last aspect, and I will also finish with that, is that there were also discussions about if the dam is a cultural heritage. Sometimes from an ecological point of view, you might think, yeah, it's a barrier and nothing more. But there are also oftentimes this perspective that infrastructure in rivers is part of local history, is part of what they say here, an emotional landscape, local heritage, a milestone in the history of the area. So yeah, that's also one way to see and to experience this infrastructure in rivers, not only as a barrier, but also of something that's potentially part of local history. Whereas, here again, another citation from one of the dam removal proponents saying, the Torranes Dam, no matter where you look, is still a vulgar dam of concrete, as there are dozens in Aragon, hundreds in Spain, and thousands in the world. So yeah, this just as a very brief idea of what the contestations surrounding dam removal look like, but I think they raise very important questions and show that river restoration, from my point of view, is not not a simple, straightforward, purely technical matter, but that there are different values and ideas about nature, about rivers, about infrastructure at stake, and that need to be seriously taken into account in order to have not only ecologically sustainable river restoration, but also socially just river restoration. So I hope, some food for thought for discussion. Thank you very much, and sorry for being a bit passing my time. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Lena. That was very interesting. And it's always interesting to see the different sides. And that's why it's so important to have that holistic vision and, yeah, take everyone's perspective into consideration. What for one person looks like heaven, for another person is hell. So, yeah, thank you very much. That was very interesting. I would suggest we now basically just, if you have any questions for Lena, given that she has to leave us early, please ask them now, and she'll do her best to answer them. Thank you so much. Any questions?
Just one quick one. Was the actual dam removed in the end, or is that inquiry still going on?
No, it's still going on. Yeah. It's also, so there's let's say legally it's decided that it's going to be removed. There was still some issue about the financing because according to Spanish law, the costs for the removal should be taken on by the company, but the company didn't want to pay for it. So they went to the Supreme Court. So there was some legal issues, but the court said, no, the company has to pay. That's what the law says. That's the current state of affairs, but it hasn't been removed yet. And as far as I know, it's also still, let's say legally, formally, it's decided. But as far as I know, people are still mobilizing to prevent that. Yeah.
Okay.
So we have another question by Yoga Terstegen.
Yes, hi, thank you, Lena, for your presentation. Super nice and good to see you again. I'm very curious, how are they managing this conflict? What kind of actions are they taking?
You mean the ones trying to implement it?
Yeah, exactly. Like, are there projects going on for bringing people together? Are there like deliberation activities? Are they doing something, or is it legal pressure, or what do they do?
Yeah, thanks for your question. I think it's a very good question. What I saw or heard is also that there was a bit of a shift in how they approached the issue. In the beginning, I think it was just seen as a more, technical legal matter. The license expired, so then the law says it has to be removed, so we remove it. But when there was so much social mobilization, people from the responsible water basin authority came also to visit the place, and of course there were also, let's say legally, formally, there were some possibilities to from people, local organizations, but also national organizations concerned with this issue, to comment on, to formally comment and give their opinion about this proposed dam removal. So there have been certain meetings and also formal possibilities to hear voices and to raise voices. As far as I know, it hasn't been thought through from the start to make it a participatory process, but it was more seen as a clearly legal technical matter, and that's where the problems arise. And I think that's actually something that you see quite a lot in conflicts surrounding dam removal or river restoration. That it leads to a lot of frustration if it just feels like a desk thought idea that some bureaucrats in the city think about and try to implement without really asking the local population about how they feel about it, what they think about it, and involving them in the process early on. It has not happened there, and also other cases I've looked at in other countries. It's quite a common pattern. my impression is that the dam removal community, they would never call themselves that in Spain, but let's say the water basin authorities that are implementing these kind of projects, that they're also really learning along the way from these kind of very conflictive cases.
Yeah, great questions. We have here a question by Harvey, who's asking, what piece of legislation would you change or introduce to better manage the removal of water infrastructure? And we had a very similar question ourselves, actually, from the Rewilding community of practice. Whether there's any sort of specific policy changes that can be introduced to facilitate this sort of transitions.
Also good question. I'm not so sure in how far it's really a policy or legal issue, but I think this taking seriously the different uses and valuations of infrastructure such as dams and rivers, taking them into account early on in such a process, I think that's really key. I'm not sure if it needs a new law for that, or a new legislation or new policy, or if it's rather a change of attitude, a change of mind, maybe also more participation and communication specialists in the water basin authorities, and not only hydraulic engineers or forest engineers, or more people from the natural sciences, but also having participation specialists in these water basin authorities. So in order to make it a more inclusive and participatory process, and also sometimes allowing for such a process to fail river restoration in the sense of, I mean to say, I think participation is important, but it should also be a serious participation to talk with the stakeholders about what's the best way forward, and how different values, different uses of a river can be brought together in what ways. And that in some cases might mean not to remove a certain barrier or dam, but to maintain it, but then maybe think about other measures that make sense. So I think this aspect of participation and taking seriously local concerns is key.
Great, thank you. So yes, a multi-stakeholder approach is obviously always difficult to, or a functioning one anyway, is difficult to achieve. We can't answer all the questions, I'm afraid. We have quite a few actually, but perhaps maybe one person here, Stephen, had a question around restore hedgey in California, whether you'd heard of that, Lena, and if there's any similarities with this issue.
I'm not 100% sure. Is it one of the bigger dam removals in the US? No, I don't know sufficiently enough about it to be able to say anything about it. But maybe more generally, without knowing the hedgey, the name it rings a bell, but I'm not 100% sure. But I think in the issue, or in the case study I looked at, the Torranes Dam, there are many similarities with other dam removal projects and dam removal conflicts. So I think, for example, the one I mentioned it's not only about if the dam is going to be removed or not, but also how the process is being taken locally and being organized, and that very much also relates to Yuka's question. So I think and this idea of desk-based outside ideas being imposed on a local area, I think that's something that sparks conflicts in many dam removal cases. And I think, I think that's one of the things you see coming back and back in many dam removal conflicts. And the other big issues of what is nature and what kind of rivers do we want, and is only a restored river valuable, or what would a river that is both healthy but also allowing for human use of it, what would it look like? These kind of questions, I don't have answers to them, but I think it's important to make them part of discussions and not assume one single answer, but acknowledge that there are different points of views on that.
Absolutely. So last question, any other questions will be answered in a document that will be shared with all attendees later on, just in the interest of time. I will ask one last question, and if we can get a quick answer for that, that'd be great. So Vo was wondering how you would advise African countries that believe that building lots of dams is the direction to take, especially for hydropower.
Yeah. Well, I don't feel in the position to advise any countries. I think there are different of course there are different interests, and I mean hydropower is also an important topic. I think also around the world, experience have also shown the potential of hydropower for generating electricity and that making industrial development possible and so on. So all these benefits, but experiences around the world also show all the devastating effects big dams are having, both ecologically as well as socially, and effects that can sometimes not be turned around, or very difficult to turn around. So I think the general advice is to carefully consider what's at stake, what would be lost, what would be gained, and make that part of societal discussion and decision in a democratic way, in one way or the other. But I think it's a very complex issue, and I think I personally think some dams are necessary. I think other dams are just built for catering for some elite interests and construction companies that gain a lot of money with it, and political dreams, and that are will need to be fulfilled. But so I'm not sure I have a good answer to that, but carefully consider what's necessary and what isn't.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lena. And thanks to the audience members for these great questions. Thank you very much. Moving on, we'll move on to the next presentation by Nick Steiner. Nick Steiner is an expert on all things sustainable water use, and we look forward to hearing what he has to say.
Thanks so much for having me. And I will speak a little bit about how we can become human beavers and why we should do that, specifically talking about dams, and quite often beavers are seen in a slightly negative light as well. And so when we look at kind of what's happening around the world, we see a lot of the problems and kind of global catastrophes that are happening. So we have droughts, with fires, with floods, and we need to ask ourselves why they're happening and what's kind of going on there. And oftentimes we only look at carbon. Like, it's the one thing everyone says carbon is at fault for everything, and if we reduce carbon emissions, everything will be solved magically. But these things have one thing in common: droughts, floods, fires. It has everything to do with water, and specifically with water in the landscape. So water cycles and how water moves through the landscape. And that's also why it's such a powerful tool that we need to look at. So to understand that, we need to understand a little bit about what's happened with water cycles. And so on the one side, as we discussed also previously, we built massive dams, completely interrupting a natural flow of water. But we've also completely destroyed landscapes. So we've taken down a lot of the trees, a lot of the vegetation. We've built massive cities, and we've kind of destroyed the natural ecosystem and the sponge that was there. And these illustrations by my colleagues at Water Stories, they make it really visible what we've done to nature and what's happening there. And the big issue is now, when the sun is shining and it shines on naked, bare soil, concrete, all these areas, it heats up a lot and it bakes the soil and it becomes really, really hard. And so when it rains, this water can't go anywhere. It can't infiltrate, and so it will find the easiest way, which is generally down, and there it's causing problems. We also have above our cities and the concrete areas, we have heat domes. So a lot of heat is rising up, creating high pressure zones, which is causing a lot of issues because it's not letting in any of the moisture and of the low pressure zones that would bring in moisture. So what do? We drill deeper wells, we get even more water out of the soil, and we completely deplete our landscapes of all the natural water that would be there. So now what's happening? We have some storms brewing. The lighter ones, they can't get through these high pressure zones. And only when the storms get really strong are they able to break through these high pressure zones. And what's happening is what we're seeing all over the world. We have a lot of destruction, we have erosion, we have all of this water because it's too much to handle for the landscape, and it goes down and it causes a lot of damage all over. And it gets even worse when we look at what we've done to many of the rivers. There's no place at all for water to infiltrate. We've put concrete everywhere, so the water just floods down, and we kind of outsource the problem to lower down in the watershed and causing even more problems in those areas. And that's what we're seeing all the time. We have floods and we have these issues after heavy rain events. So what we've created as humans is these great little pockets of heat that turn into fire, that bake the soil, and that only allow for heavy rainstorms. So we've created this kind of vicious cycle of flood, drought, fire, and it keeps repeating, and it keeps destroying the world around us. So how should water cycle when everything is going as it should be going in nature? So generally, we have lush vegetation, we have rivers, we have a lot of water inside the soil. And there also what's happening, which is quite crucial, is transpiration from the leaves. So what's happening that the trees are also transpiring, they're bringing water into the atmosphere, they're creating more rain and cycling this water through the landscape. So quite a few of the trees can even transpire up to 300 liters a day, which is extremely important for the cycling of water that we need. And what's happening there is that we have a lot of bacteria and small microbes, and they form the nuclei for raindrops. So this is an essential process, and we've completely disturbed that. So when we look at these landscapes, this is ideally what we should have, like a natural cycle of pressure zones of moving water through the landscape. And so forests and these kind of ecosystems close to rivers, that's kind of the ideal state that we would like to have. And so we could think, great, let's just keep humans out of all these natural areas and everything will be restored and all problems will be solved. But the issue is that we've created a lot of landscapes which are called brittle. So that means that these landscapes, they do get rain, but the rain often comes only in winter, and we have very long dry periods in summer where everything just dries out. And in those landscapes, it won't regenerate by itself. And that is a major issue. So here are some pictures from farm visits that we did in Portugal. So you can see kind of from left to right. So that was a small erosion gully, so water was cutting through the landscape and just leaving it and not being available for plants. In the picture in the middle, it got a little bit deeper. And then on the right, that was already 4 meters deep. And it's a massive erosion gully, and those won't heal by themselves. They're causing massive problems and all the water is leaving. And when that continues, we see desertification, and that's happening all over the world. And that's also where we need to do something about it. And that's why we as humans have the kind of responsibility to solve what we have done. Because otherwise, when it rains, this is exactly what's happening. We just see these massive floods, nowhere to infiltrate, and we see destruction. So we have to go from too little water to too much water, and we as humans kind of need to balance this in the areas where nature can't do it by itself. So yeah, should we give up? I would say definitely not. This is exactly the moment for us to do it while we still can, while we still have the possibility, and it's not too late to work with water. And the great thing is it's already done. Nature has shown us exactly what needs to be done, exactly how, and we just need to emulate what natural systems have been doing for so many years. Here's a great example where beaver works. So you can see it's an area that was burned completely by forest fires, but where the beaver dams were, the plants are still there, everything is still green. And this is exactly the kind of approach that we as humans need to take, kind of resolve these issues and to find solutions to them. So what we need to do as humans is we need to slow the water, we need to spread it, and we need to sink it. So those are kind of our mantras that we can go by. And that way we can create these lush landscapes that can handle all these extremes. So you can kind of see it as the soil needs to become a sponge so it can absorb and handle that rain when it falls. And the trees and transpiration act kind of as pumps and pumping the water further upstream and away from the river. So that way we can create a healthy cycle. And so now we need to see, okay, this is nice in theory, but what could this look like in practice? And I have a few examples there from different areas and different scales. So one thing is what is called a beaver dam analog. And it's exactly what it sounds like. So this is one example by Syracuse University College. And this is what's being applied in many areas. So when you have a stream that would normally just cause erosion, you kind of build with loose sticks, sometimes bigger logs. You kind of create a bit of a permeable dam. So it lets some water through, but it slows it down a bit. It allows sedimentation to settle a little bit. And that way we can slow the water and spread it through the landscape. This is one example of a project that we just started in Portugal with a very small incision. So this is a bit of a terrace. And so the erosion that would normally just wash down and cause problems gets infiltrated by this terrace. It has a slight 1% inclination and takes the water to a site where we want to infiltrate it. So also very, very little work, but it can have tremendous effects in the rainy season. And this is kind of the process, what's happening there, because as soon as we store water in the landscape, it moves under the soil surface and it moves down. And so then when we have trees there, the roots can get to that water for many years when the water is gone from the surface. And so this is another example of a project we just started working. It's a 400-hectare elephant sanctuary that we're building in Portugal. And here also we're building these small little trenches where water can infiltrate, and that way it can recharge rivers from below instead of through erosive force above the soil. One example here from Zach Weiss, my colleague at Water Stories, from a great video of Andrew Millison, connected ponds in the landscape, all built just with clay in an area where normally you would just have erosive forces and a dry period throughout the year. And this way we can restore soil and we can restore what should be there in a natural ecosystem. So here's a bit more of an overview of the map, how that looks. They've built tons of connected ponds, terraces, and the lush landscape is the result of that. Another great example by Niels Bergman in Al-Baida, Saudi Arabia. It was completely deserted, completely dry, no chance to recover. But they built small little dams, channels for water to slow down, to spread. And a few years later, even with 3 years without rainfall, it's now turning green again. They're able to do agriculture again. And the regeneration is possible even in the driest areas around the world. Another example in Portugal, Tamera, was also extremely dry. With the amazing work of Sepp Holzer, now there's a landscape of lakes all connected in these areas that would otherwise be very, very prone to just drying out to drought and nothing could grow. Here another example in Austria, also connected ponds. And this is the area where normally you wouldn't have a river, but now these ponds are creating the flow that we need to look for. Another great example from India, very dry area. Andrew Millison has covered all that in his YouTube channel. They built all these connected ponds, rivers, regenerating the soil. You can see all the blue areas, they're all connected. And now it's possible to do agriculture again. Everything is green, regenerating. Same here with different shapes, different formats, but all the same concept. Infiltrate rain when it comes, bring it into the soil, and underground, it will keep moving. Here also Rajendra Singh has also done incredible work there. He even revived 5 rivers that weren't flowing anymore. The groundwater table has also been risen by many meters just by infiltrating water. And you can see here this area, 1 million people have been impacted by that. Decentralized water storage. So not these massive concrete dams, but small earthen ones all over the landscape that can then infiltrate the water. Here with what Just Dig It did all over the world, they're just infiltrating water there, trees can grow, and everything is regenerating because it's water first and then the plants. And you can also do it very small. This is the road outside my house with a lot of erosion. I built a tiny little terrace there, and now it's filling with sediment. And yeah, it can work very small, very large. And these are the landscapes that we can create as human beavers. So yeah, thank you all, and let's become human beavers.
Wow, thank you, Nick. That was very inspiring and great to see all the visuals. Very impactful, obviously, to see the before and after, and also to have this kind of visual of like, it doesn't matter how small it is, everyone can have an impact. So thank you very much for sharing that. So yeah, moving on to our last speaker presentation. Also for you to know, you will be able to ask questions to Nick at the end of the session. So yeah, thank you very much. Our next speakers are Hanna and Jonas from Biking for Biodiversity. They are 2 ecologists who are on an incredible mission to document biodiversity around Europe and Asia. Today, they're actually joining us from Vietnam, I believe. Yeah. So yes, thank you for joining us today. And just before you start, I really enjoyed the quote that you'd shared on your website, which is, "A man on foot, on horseback, or on a bicycle will see more, feel more, enjoy more in 1 mile than the motorized tourists can imagine 100 miles. So on that note, the floor is to you.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Nick, for your amazing presentation. It was really, really interesting, and we are looking forward to the Q&A session. Yeah, a little bit about ourselves, but we don't want to take so much time away from it. We are both ecologists, but we are also adventure lovers. I'm from Slovakia, Jonas is from Germany, and our wish for adventure, as well as our love for nature, was the one that led us on this journey by bicycle, which we started 1.5 years ago in Germany. We quit our jobs in an environmental NGO that we were working before, and we decided that we want to learn more about what is happening on the ground with biodiversity, with its protection, and especially we wanted to break out from our European bubble of EU-funded projects and well, the word that probably most of you already know, and see what's actually happening on a global scale and how people are fighting biodiversity loss. So we are now in Vietnam. We covered 17 countries so far and met with over 250 conservationists in all these countries, spent time with them, learned from them and what they are doing. And as Alex said, indeed, there were several major waterways and rivers on this journey that we crossed. So we would just like to take you through some of the big rivers and some of their stories, communities that we visited. These basically from west to east. The first river that we visited was the Danube, which was to me a very personal river. I grew up in a small town that is next to the Danube, and I've only heard stories about how the Danube was as a free-flowing river, how amazing the wetland was in my hometown, how my grandfathers, my grandparents, they worked, they went fishing, they collected all kinds of riparian plants. I never saw that side of the Danube because, as you know, since the 19th century, basically the Danube has been heavily modified and dammed, and these decades of channelization, of modification, have destroyed most of its wild riparian ecosystems. We visited a few examples that gave me hope how this kind of ecosystems can be brought back. One was the Donauauen National Park in Austria, a national park that has been founded after a successful activism movement against the building of a hydropower dam. And due to these successful efforts, a national park was founded. And now the national park is broadening its activities and focusing on protecting wild islands along the Danube. And we visited also other organizations downstream that work in opening up side arms and bringing up these ecosystems. And they are very much struggling because financially it's extremely expensive even to revitalize, to restore a small section of a river. We are talking millions of euros, tens of millions of euros to restore maybe 100, 200 meters of a side arm. Not to mention all kinds of other structures that have to be removed. And these organizations, they are also active in lobbying for the government to flood these floodplains that are naturally not flooding anymore. So their struggle is very much real, although they are on the path to success. And with this mind of river rewilding, we started moving towards Asia, and this is where we kind of realized that rewilding is not in the same point on the east compared to Europe as what we are living in.
Yeah, so after visiting the Danube and talking about rewilding, it was in a way back in time as we went further east because we realized when we look on a global perspective, the most pressing issue is not rewilding, it's preventing that rivers go into the same very bad ecological state that many European rivers are in, you know. As we just learned, rewilding is very complicated, not only financially and ecologically, but also socially. And what we realized is that we still have the chance in many parts of the world to just prevent channelization, to prevent big dams being built in the first place. However, what we also saw was that the same mistakes that have been done in Europe decades ago are now being repeated in many parts of the world. And we just want to show you some examples of communities we visited that live along rivers that told us stories that are unfortunately, repeating the same mistakes. Yeah, so one of the most interesting cases we visited was the Çorum River in the northeast of Turkey. We met an organization there who for decades has been fighting to stop more and more dams. We are talking about dozens of dams on one river being built within a few decades. They have been trying it with protests, they have been trying it with lawsuits, but nothing helps. It's continuing. The national government, the very authoritarian national government, is completely ignoring these people. It's just pressing through its issues. It's building dams that don't necessarily have any benefits for the local community that has been living with these rivers and of these rivers for hundreds of years, but that are just benefiting a few that are reaping the profits of the electricity and of the construction itself. And that's something we've seen a lot, that local communities are ignored. So when we visited the Indus in the Pakistani mountains, we also saw the same. There's a huge hydropower plant that is supposed to be built in one of the most fragile ecosystems in the world, the high deserts of the Trans-Himalayas and the Karakoram. And there, the same story. The government that sits hundreds of kilometers away never spoke to these communities that will be affected. And they're just pushing through the projects no matter what the locals think about it. Yeah. And then two maybe even more iconic examples are the Ganges and the Mekong, two of the biggest rivers in the world, two of the rivers that support the most livelihoods in the world. So we had the chance to visit the Ganges Delta, where the Sundarbans are, the biggest mangrove forest in the world, really a completely unique ecosystem that cannot be replicated, that once it's destroyed, it's gone. But also here, not only through damming, but also using the river as irrigation and also using the river as a waste disposal. It's endangered, and it's not only the ecosystem, it's the local people that when we went there, it was really incredible to see how much they live in harmony with the water, how much they depend on the water. And now they are threatened by salinization because the inflow has reduced from the Ganges because of the irrigation and some channelization and damming projects upstream. And that really threatens the livelihoods, but also the identity of the people to the core. And then a similar story along the Mekong. The Mekong supplies the biggest inland fishery in the world. People have been living with and off the river for centuries. And now, because hydropower is a cheap power, it is in some regards a green power. So a lot of the countries that are along the Mekong want to benefit from this. Poor countries, which often don't have many other sources of income. But again, they are building dams without environmental assessments, or if assessments are done, they're just ignored afterwards. Then things like sediment flow, which is crucial for this ecosystem, is completely disrupted, threatening hundreds of fish species that occur solely in the Mekong system. Yeah, so what we learn here, like what we learned on this journey with these examples is just, as Lena said in the beginning, there is a cultural and industrial value maybe to these dams for people. But before that was the case, for hundreds of years, there was a value, very direct value, an economic value and the cultural value to these wild rivers. And we just hope that we will find a way to protect these rivers where they still exist and don't have to go through the process of first industrializing them and then rewilding them. But we also don't know how. So this is what we would like to ask the audience now, whether they have any ideas how these mistakes that have been made in Europe and that we have also seen being made right now everywhere else, how they can be prevented in the future. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Hanna and Jonas. Yes, so you ended your presentation with a question, I think a very, very crucial and important one. Any questions for our wonderful speakers? Okay, so I see one here from Anjali. Thank you, Anjali, for your question. So what kind of community engagement will help make restoring rivers or even their segments more cost-effective? Especially when we go east, cost-effectiveness is the only option for any restorative project. So are there some specific tools or, anything that can make these processes more plausible in those communities? Yeah,
I can happily answer that. I think the main strategy here that needs to be applied is decentralization. Like, that's what it's all about. The big issues we're seeing is generally when there's massive dams, massive concrete dams that are completely disrupting natural flows. And so to make it cost effective, having a lot of small decentralized systems is much better. And the river restoration, we often think it's just about the river itself and the kind of the riverbed that we see, but it starts way further up in the watershed. And it's some of the examples I shared in India, where thousands of people have been working. Some of these projects were only done with shovels, so very cost effective. So you always have to see if you're going either for machines or for human labor. It depends a bit on what is more available. And what they did is, by just working soil, so no concrete, no nothing, just working soil, compacting clay, they built all these decentralized structures that could handle these heavy rain events. And in the soil, the water could slowly move down and then seep into the river in a way that's not erosive, not causing any problems, but restoring the flow of the river. So groundwater table was raised, rivers were restored. And this is extremely cost effective. If we look at what's happening in the future, once everything is destroyed, it will be very difficult to bring it back. But if we do this now and we build lots of these decentralized structures without really keeping the water from going further down, that's the main thing. So no plastic liners, no things like that, like just clay layers, infiltrate back into the aquifer, infiltrate it back into the rivers. That way it's absolutely possible, and it also takes a lot of the pressure away from needing to have all that water come from one big dam, but rather each small community, maybe even each property, could have their own little water storage, and then it becomes extremely cost effective as well.
Yeah, that sounds like a great solution, actually. So multiple smaller community-owned kind of mini dams and alike. Yeah.
I would also like to add that when we talk about the costs of water structures, hydropower projects, basically anything, it's important to talk about hidden costs, because if we build a hydropower project, that might generate a certain amount of money. But we talked to a community at the Mekong, and there they said that half of the fishermen stopped fishing simply because since a dam has been built, the fish stock has been going down so drastically that there's simply not enough fish to support all the fishers anymore. So these people have to look for new livelihoods. So these are costs that cannot be ignored when we talk about the costs of building or removing structures.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And I think particularly in countries where you have more things like subsistence farming, just not our developed nations of the West, this becomes a crucial factor to take into consideration. So yeah, thank you for your contribution, Jonas. Another question we had here from Natalie was how, well, from the scientific and academic realm, how can we convince stakeholders, not skateholders, to invest in the recovery of the rivers' landscapes?
Yeah, okay, if you're not unmuting yourself, then I can go first again. I think one of the main things to highlight is what happens if we don't. Because we're running down a very dark path, so to say, with how we're destroying our landscape and all these things. As soon as we run out of water, we're really in deep trouble, because we often look at climate and these things kind of as this distant thing, and polar bears are suffering, but this is affecting everyone around the world. So this is coming for everyone. So be it food security, also clean water availability, and all these things are dependent on healthy water cycles. And that's why it's so crucial to do that in the landscape. And I think on the motivational side, the Pani Foundation in India has done it fantastically. They basically set up a price. So they put up a lot of money and said, whichever community stores and infiltrates the largest amount of water wins this prize. And so all the communities were fighting who could build the best natural dams and all these features. And as a co-benefit, even if they didn't win the monetary value, what they won in the end is the land was fertile again. They could do agriculture again. They can regenerate their own soil. And suddenly, no one cared about the money that they could win in the prize, but they could live again and grow their own food. And so sometimes you need a bit of a monetary motivation to then see the benefits that are happening on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. So Alex has just posted a very good comment in our chat box, saying that many traditional land uses were in sync with natural processes, and that essentially these have been perceived in our more, in brackets, progressive worlds as backwards. And some of them, obviously, we now see globally a return, or at least a consideration of more indigenous practices. But obviously, that's a very small percentage still compared to what we generally see in our capitalist world. How can we persuade communities to look to the past for inspiration? Now, obviously, again, like taking a slightly broader lens and including more stakeholders, because that's always a challenge, right?
Yeah, I think it's a lot is about phrasing. When we talk about restoring natural processes and restoring natural river dynamics and river landscapes, we don't have to look in the past. We just have to look at natural rivers that they make people feel something. That's also something when we visited these big rivers, these landscapes of water, and talked to the people there, you could feel the love and the connection that they feel for this river that feeds them, that provides them with water and everything. It's not looking back to the past. It's just looking to another reality, to something that could be. It's not about going back. It's just about going in a different direction that is maybe less focused on immediately profit, but focus on a sustainable livelihood and life with nature.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It's also about changing the narrative and the language and storytelling elements that we use, of course. Yeah, very good point. So there were a few more questions. Also, Natalie, don't worry about your mistake. I just got confused while reading it out. Another question for Nick, which is by Yoka. How did you meet your communities, and what was... So it's in multiple questions. What was the incentive to take up such a gorgeous but also time-consuming project? And perhaps you want to answer the first two.
How I got into it was I did my master's in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, and it was always raining and cold. So I just wanted to go somewhere warm. So I moved to Tenerife. And that's also where I'm still living now. And here I realized we only have 280 millimeters or 11 inches of rain, which is really not a lot. And on one of the farms where I was volunteering, all that usually happened during 1 week. And the rest of the year it was just dry. And so that's when I realized, wow, if we want to do any kind of agriculture or even survive and have enough water, we really need to value every drop. And so that's how I got into this. And it was, many, many years ago. But it just led me down this path of like, if we don't have water in the landscape and if we don't manage our rainwater correctly, we can't do anything else. We can't grow food. And if we don't have food and water, then nothing else really matters. So that got me into it. And then just the community, the global community of people working with water is incredible. So a lot of people I met online but then also giving lots of workshops, working with clients. And when you meet one person, you meet the next, and then, oh, you should talk to this person. And as soon as you're in that rabbit hole, it's really deep. It's impossible to get out of. But I love it so much because you can directly see results. Like when we build something on the ground, it takes one rainfall and you can see something happening. And that is just so motivating. So it keeps me going every day.
Wow. No, I get that. That's very, very, motivating, of course. So Yoka's third question was, there's obviously some hurdles. I think we've touched upon quite a few already, but perhaps you have any
maybe
example?
I can elaborate, but like what my question is mainly about is like, of course, there are some people, landowners that are very progressive and understand the whole story that you're talking about. I'm sort of curious, like, how do we go beyond? Like there are so many landowners that do continue with same style of farming, and do you encounter maybe communities that or landowners that are interested but maybe see a lot of challenges and hurdles, and how do you overcome them?
There's a lot of challenges and hurdles, specifically when it comes to implementation, because it's costly quite often. So you really need to show that it makes financial sense, and it almost always does. So sometimes you have a bit of an investment at the beginning, you need to figure things out, and then you have water in the landscape, you can farm longer term, you can have crops during a drought. And when you can show these examples of similar farms in similar contexts or even worse contexts, that's what we found. That's the main thing. It is a long-term investment, but it's like a bank account. If you only take water out and you never put any in, you're going to run out at some point. So the financial side makes so much sense. And luckily, the whole natural side evolves with that and kind of comes as a free bonus.
Yeah. Thank you, Yoka, for your question. I have a question for Hanna and Jonas. Given you've had quite the journey so far, 17 or 18 countries already, what would be an example of the most inventive and sort of easy to apply? So I think we're really talking about the practicality of the solution here, rewilding river solution that you've encountered.
As we said, like most of the rivers that we visited are not actually in the process of rewilding. They're still in the process of industrializing. So it was more about how that can be not necessarily stopped, but at least done in an ecological way. In the Danube, we definitely saw some interesting rewilding projects, but what was striking in a way how hard it is. So we visited close to Hanna's hometown in Slovakia. We visited a project by the NGO Bros, where they flooded a forest again, and an island that regularly that used to be a beautiful flood landscape that would be flooded several times a year, but then was completely cut off through the channelization of the Danube. And now they're creating these beautiful landscapes again, simply by changing the water regimen. It also showed that it's very hard to convince the water departments to do something, but that's already enough sometimes, is to just let the water flow more naturally again. And that was interesting to see that it doesn't always take huge infrastructure works or removing structures. It's just about thinking about how water management is done and then adjusting it to the natural processes and dynamics that we found before these structures were built.
Great. One more question here from James. When you remove a medium to large dam, so we're not talking about any cute micro dams here, what happens downstream? So if a dam and reservoir has existed for a very, very long time, yeah, so what properties, structures, etc., will have to be built in the old floodplain? That's, I think, a very, very topical question.
Yeah, I mean, if there is actually floodplain that is big enough that that can handle the water, then the river will form its natural way and carve its way in some shape or form, depending on the natural obstacles that it finds. The main problem is that in these kind of heavily modified rivers, also there are a lot of villages, towns, cities already very close to the river. The rivers themselves are not just the dam, but there is a proper concrete channel. So basically how it works in nature is that the floodplain that the river can stretch out, that space has to be created, and that might have to mean that villages have to be, or people have to move, have to relocate, and have to give space to that river to actually return to its natural state and flow freely.
Yeah, so it's clear that there must be, like, changes must happen if you remove a large dam. But when we were in Pakistan, we talked to people that were victims of the huge floods that happened last year there. So it shows that, like, as the climate crisis intensifies, it's like people will have to deal with these issues anyway, because many of the structures that were built are not able to deal with what's coming with these extreme weather events. So it's much easier to do it in a controlled way, and remove certain areas, or maybe just what often is enough, turn agricultural land back into floodplains, and do that in a controlled manner instead of waiting until disaster happens and all of this is destroyed anyway.
Yeah. Great answers. Thank you. Another question I see here from quite a while ago is from Eva. I hope she's still here. Is there any centralized or decentralized organization to assess and launch the kind of participatory processes that we need for this kind of thing? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So Water Stories, that's I shared the link before, I can share it again. It's basically a community, like a global community of water cycle restoration practitioners. So the idea there is we have on the one side lots of inspiring stories of people who have been doing this work. There's some very small guides and all that, but we also have a course and different courses depending on how involved you want to get. So if you just want to go onto an advocacy level, that's possible, but it goes all the way to becoming a practitioner and learning exactly, like, which kind of machine to use for which job. And that's exactly the idea of this community. Like, how can we spread that knowledge all over the world? How can we inspire people to do that? And how can we train the people? Because there's simply not enough of us out there. We need thousands and thousands more working on these decentralized structures.
Okay, great. That sounds like a fantastic organization, actually. I'm sure lots of people in the audience will agree. I have one more question here from Andre. Whether we know of somewhere where they've managed to come up with a solution where local industrial and cultural history has been preserved while still removing the dam. So a kind of perfect case scenario. This would have been a good question for Lena, actually. Yeah. Nick, no?
No, not removal, but I think the work of Rajendra Singh in India, it's very culturally and it's very based in traditional water harvesting practices that were applied before, cheap pumps, fuels, pipes, all this kind of work. So I'm not aware that any big dams were removed, but lots and lots of decentralized water storage was built. So it's going in a slightly different direction, but it's a perfect example of how restoring water cycles work there.
Yeah, great. I just see that Vo has posted a comment whether you, Nick, would be open to having a conversation after today's event. Yeah, for an issue she would like advice for in her local context in Africa.
Absolutely. If you can't tell by now, I'm so passionate about water and it's my full-time thing to do that. So I'm always happy to help.
Yeah, amazing. One more question for you, Nick. What role do you see technology playing in aiding water conservation efforts within regenerative agriculture?
I think technology can be a super powerful tool. So one thing that has really made our lives so much easier are drones and drone mapping, because before getting accurate data about a landscape was really difficult and expensive. And now we just go out with our drone, we can map and we can get centimeter accuracy levels to know exactly, okay, where can water flow? How can we build the terraces? How can we do that? So there, I think technology is incredible. And then also on the kind of longer term monitoring and evaluation of how things are working. So with satellite imagery, we can work with different kind of data there to see, is vegetation recovering, what's happening in the landscape, what's happening there. So it's, yeah, I definitely see that technology is helping. Also, what is incredible now, some of the GPS high accuracy machines. So you can design on the computer, you can design different terracing systems, and then that just gets into the bulldozer and they can build perfect terraces and all these kind of things. So yeah, technology can support a lot, but we shouldn't get too kind of techno-focused and only working on that. Like, it's many of the traditional techniques in combination with technology that do the magic, so to say.
Amazing. Okay, unless there's any more questions, I think I've covered most, if not all of them. More questions? We still have a bit of time. No? Okay. I feel like because Lena has already left, the Q&A is slightly shorter than we'd planned. But if you have any more questions, feel free to email them to us and our speakers will answer them and we'll share, or directly to Nick, but also to us. We will make sure that every question is answered. Yeah, great. Okay, I see some more coming in. No? So before you leave us, thank you all for joining today. Please keep in touch with us. So we are on Instagram under Rewilding COP. We've today reached 1,000 followers, which has taken us quite a while, as anyone who has Instagram and is trying to build a following will know. So we're very happy. Thank you for those who follow us already. We also have a website at rewildingcop.org. And as I said earlier, you can email us at rewildingcop@gmail.com. And we're currently building a community on Discord. So if you'd be happy to join us there, please do. This is where we share our forthcoming events, any jobs, any other events that are external to us, and just, make sure that people can actually interact with each other versus the kind of bi-directional traffic we see on Instagram. We're also on LinkedIn, but somehow that wasn't included on my slide, but it's also Rewilding COP, so feel free to follow us there too. And yeah, most of all, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been great to seeing so many of you today, especially given the sort of mid-afternoon time that we host our events at. So do appreciate you joining. And yeah, lastly, great presentations. So many thanks to our presenters for being so inspiring and so open to giving us their time. So I do appreciate that. So thanks again, Hanna and Jonas and Nick. And yeah, that would be it for today. Please follow us and stay in touch, hopefully. Thank you very much.